Hello and welcome to As We May Think. It seems like an eternity ago to me, even though it was actually the middle of July. This is early September when I'm recording this. And so it was probably only about 6 weeks ago that I did my first live coding, only obviously not really live, but recorded coding where I didn't really edit out a bunch of material. I kind of just stuck with what I typed and said at the time and left it at that. I haven't gone back to that. And I really need to, A, because I still want the app that I was trying to build, and B, because I think there's actual value to having something like this where I code in front of you and I make a lot of mistakes and I have to go search for things and I have to go look up things that I probably ought to know right off the top of my head. But that's the way it is. I've got to do it. I think there's value in it because I think it helps other people who maybe are not yet comfortable with developing code to see that somebody who's developed code for a really long time now still has struggles and still hammers through a bunch of problems and has to figure things out and spends time trying to go look up things. And yes, I go to Stack Overflow too. That's just part of it. So here we go again. This is ScorePad. If you didn't watch the previous video, ScorePad is an app that I'm writing simply to keep track of scores for games. But here's the twist. The twist is that multiple people can all be connected to the exact same score sheet, and because that's what I'm calling the individual score sheets, and they can then coordinate. So it's like I can record my score, you can record your score, and we'll both see them on the same score sheet. That kind of thing actually works better for when a lot of people are playing a game together. So fortunately, you couldn't see me waving my arms around there as I actually said that. Anyway, so I had to kind of refamiliarize myself with this code, and I remember that the place I was stuck last time, right about the time I left, was attempting to do this fetch with a post. I actually didn't know my syntax for fetch at all. To be honest, I usually use AngularJS for the most part, or I'm just using a very simple fetch like this one where I'm just doing a get, and I didn't really know how to do a post with fetch. I'm used to using those AngularJS wrappers, and those are actually based on, URL XHTML or whatever they call it. So looking at this with a fresh set of eyes, or at least 6 weeks along, I found these numbers that I picked, while probably more reflective of reality, they are also confusing as hell. So what I'm trying to say here is validate the ID. Score sheet ID. If it's valid, return the same value. However, if the ID isn't valid, return a new one. Create a new score sheet. And return that ID. So in other words, it becomes the same as if you did this down here. So in fact, I will probably, this needs to become something way simpler. I will actually make both of these become the same thing. So if you hit this, do I even need this other? Yeah, I do. If you don't supply an ID, then a new score sheet will be created and the ID returned. Okay, so, and we might as well just turn this into a function now because it's going to happen sooner or later anyway. That's identical code right there. I like the fact that I never noticed that. Identical code is highlighted if you have the same code. Huh, that's a neat feature in Visual Studio Code that I never knew was there. So, by the way, if you are new to this, you're going to listen to me prattle, because I prattle. So I just sit here and I yammer for a while. Let's see, so we'll make a function. Create new score sheet. Yeah, we'll go with that for the moment. Okay, and this one calls the same thing. That may change later, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now those both use the same code. There's an old adage that says if you've done something twice, that's enough. You don't need to wait to do it 10 times before you create a function to do it. Go ahead and automate it now. And in fact, when it comes to automation, the same could be said at the command line as well. If you find yourself typing the same things over and over again to do things, for goodness sakes, just go automate it. Create something to make it, at a minimum, write down the series of steps for the thing you're trying to do. Let's see if I've actually broken the app. So the app at the moment is this little lit element component. And I actually have to remind myself how I set this up. Was I using web? Yes, I was. I'm bundling this. So I must have had Webpack running in the background. And, ooh. Well, John, good of you to talk the talk but not walk the walk, because you have no scripts or anything to automate the basic steps. So first thing we're going to do is server. So we're going to do node.mon index.js. So we're going to actually carry through with what I just said. And okay, so now at least I have one command. All right, this one will run the server and automatically restart the server because that's what node.mon does. So I can do npm run server and get exactly what I saw just a second ago. Yes, all right, so that's working. And now let's create another template where we can, and now I'm going to have to remember my Webpack npx Webpack. So if you haven't used npx before, I'm surprised that some people haven't used npx much, or haven't used it before, or don't use it much. You'll see people do this. I've even seen some people who really know their coding fairly well do a weird thing like this. They'll say node modules, and then they'll find the name of the thing. Let's say it's Webpack. And then they'll go into the bin directory, and then they will actually run, find the thing that they want to run. You don't have to do that. If you say npx, this is the node version of npm that does execution. So npx is really cool because if you don't have the thing that you want to run installed at the moment, like let's say I wanted to run I don't know, some kind of generator, that generates code or something like that, but I know I'm only going to use it once. I could use npx and then the name of that package. It would install the package, run it, and then it would be gone. I would not actually see it as part of this project or as part of my global environment on this machine. So that's what npx can do. But the other thing npx can do, and this is particularly neat, is if you have stuff in modules that you've installed already, like I've done here. If you look, you'll notice I've installed both Webpack and Webpack CLI. It will go and it'll say, well, I see that you have that module already, and I'll just go ahead and run it for you. So I don't have to dig my way down into the node modules to find the thing to execute. I can just, in most cases, run npx and I'll get what I want. So I can, you saw that up here where I ran npx to do Webpack. Okay, so what I need to do, I don't remember my Webpack syntax. Because I want watch. That's what I want. And it's probably called something obvious like watch. Wow. Whole lot of options. Yeah, just -w. Okay, so let's try that. npx webpack -w. Okay, perfect. So that would now automatically recompile everything every time I make a change to, for example, this app.js. However, if you'll recall, we were making a change here, so let's go ahead and finish that. Whenever you're doing commands inside the inside the package.json file, and you're putting in these little scripts, npx is implicit. You don't have to actually specify it. So in here, I can get by with webpack-w, and if it can't find webpack in my path, it will do the npx thing to see if it's there. So we'll save this, and now we will run the other half also out of our npm scripts. Run app. And there we go. So now if I make a change here, let's make some kind of change. Oh, yeah, okay, let's get rid of this nonsense, and we'll put h1 ScorePad. Yeah, there we go. It's not much of a change, but it's a change. And you'll notice it rebuilt. And so now if we come over here, there, we see the new version. And because we're using a router called Navigo, it should have noticed that there was no ID in the URL. So in this case, so it said no ID. And so it noticed that, and it should have made a, let's do it again. The debugger, unfortunately, doesn't capture all of the API calls I make, even when the debugger is closed. So we have to refresh now. And yeah, there it is right there. Oh, I got a 500. That's not good. So we're off to a roaring start. John has already made his first mistake of this recording. Res is not defined. Oh, of course it's not defined. That would be the first thing that I did wrong, and it's an obvious one. So create new store sheet. We'll pass response to that. It's not resource, it's response. There we go. Now that will have automatically restarted NodeMon. So if I restart here, sure enough, works perfectly this time. And yep, I got back an ID of 2. So far so good on that. What is this down here? Site manifest. Oh, you know what I bet that is? I'll bet. Okay, so if you'll remember, I think I got my index.html. I used the HTML boilerplate. Yeah, so I used the HTML5 boilerplate here, and I don't actually have a site manifest yet. So that's why it's giving an error there, because I'm referring to a file that, yep, does not actually exist. This response.json. That's interesting. It's like my fetch. So what did I do wrong there? So actually there's something wrong in how I did this. I'm going to have to figure that out. So this code may still actually not be right, because I expected fetch to give me back a promise. That is the usual way of things. So for example, this fetch right here came back with a promise, and then we're actually grabbing the response. And I wonder, are we actually working in that case either? Maybe I'm doing something wrong with how I'm using fetch. Okay, so you can still see some of the stuff left over from where I was doing examples before. Let's see what happens if I do this. Okay, so the back end correctly saw that there was a score sheet, or sorry, this code correctly saw that there was a score sheet ID. It makes the API call, but it's acting like this response right here is in fact a promise itself. I think that's what it's telling me. Yeah, it's not working the way I thought it would, because I thought fetch used promises for everything, and yet somehow I'm seeing a promise which is still pending right here, not an actual resolved thing. So on the front end, we know that there's a bug in how this is making its API calls. So I don't need these logs anymore, but I do maybe need to tweak this code. See, here's what I was expecting to have happen, and so I may delay this and come back to it, but I expected this to come back with a promise, and then I attached to that, and then whatever came back in the response, I would expect that to be the actual contents of the response, which would be, in this case, I would expect it to be I would expect it to be the ID 1 or the ID 2 that we were seeing. And instead, it's logging it like it is. And I'm still getting a site manifest, too. How am I still getting a site manifest? Thought I removed that. Am I? Yep, there's my problem. I edited the original. I edited the output, not the template. There we go. So that will fix that problem. That will be gone on this next one. Good. Now, let me do other stuff and then come back to that. So we did a little bit of automation. That's good. But I've got to do some more stuff. It's time for... I think it's time for this to actually do some kind of persistence, or is it more important? It's more important that I deal with the front end. It's more important that I make sure that my code and those routers comes back with the right value. Surprising to some of you is the fact that I don't normally do a running commentary as I do all of my coding. That would be a little weird. It would probably also drive my people I work with to the point of insanity. So I don't do that. As a result, hearing all of my inner thoughts as I do this might sometimes be really weird. So clearly this is right. Time for a breakpoint. That's what we need. We need a breakpoint, John. Okay, so let's go here and here. And let's reload this page. Okay. So with a breakpoint in place, now I should be able to see what response is. That's what I expected to see. Response dot. That doesn't make any sense. How am I getting promise back? Oh, wait a minute. Things are occurring to me. I bet that is correct. Hold on. I believe I'm supposed to do this. Okay. Sorry for those of you who already knew the answer to this and you've been screaming at the screen for the last few minutes. My apologies. You know, it's funny. I do the exact same thing. but I listen to a lot of podcasts. And one of my favorites in some ways is one called, what is the name of that podcast? Hold on. I can look at my phone and I can tell you the answer to it right now. It's a good podcast, so that's why it's worth me taking a second to tell you about it. So it is called, the Shop Talk Show. So the Shop Talk Show is a pretty fun one, but the guys who are on it are experts in a lot of ways. At least to me, they are experts. Everybody's an expert or not an expert with respect to other people, but to me, they're experts when it comes to things like HTML and CSS. They have skills I don't even begin to touch, especially things like animation. If we ever do anything with animation, I'm going to have somebody come on the show to teach me how to do animation because I don't know how to do anything. But as soon as they open their mouths and they start talking about JavaScript stuff, they have a tendency to say a lot of things that just drive me nuts. And I find myself shouting at the radio and saying, no, that's not right. You're not understanding. You completely have it wrong. You're probably doing the same thing right now. Or at least some of you are. Saying, how could you not have known result? That when you do this, response.json, to actually parse the response that comes back from the server, that is going to also return a promise. That's then what you have another then on. So there's a then that strips off all the external stuff off of the response and gets to just the stuff that's the data returned. And then there's another promise that actually handles the data. That's how fetch is supposed to work. So I say that without having actually tested it, but I have a high level of confidence. And as any of you who've watched me code, I often have a high level of confidence until I'm proven completely wrong. But let's hope, in this case, that I don't end up looking like an idiot. Yay! Okay, I did it right now. So that is the value, and we are good. So in this case, we don't want to change the URL. We got back the same value that we passed. So let's do this. So there was an ID, and the returned ID was the same. So let's say in those cases, we don't change anything. If we got the same idea. So what you're about to see is how I code. Okay, so how I code is often I write a bunch of explanatory text that explains what I'm thinking, and then I write code to do what I thought I should do. So I'm writing out the algorithm, and then I'm coding to that algorithm. I know this is odd, but it's how I code. So if we got back the same ID, then we just need to get to load up the score sheet data, which is presumably when we get back the same value, we'll also get all the score sheet data with it. Okay, so that's that circumstance. However, in these ones down here, I passed no value, but got a value back. So now I need to actually change my URL. And Navigo has a way to do this. Changing the page, router.navigate. Okay, so it's going to, in our case, it's going to be this.router. Navigate. Okay, so we're going to tell them to go to okay, so we need to go to dollar Okay, this might or might not be a great way to do this. So let's try this and see what happens. Let's see. Oh, we'll need to change the server slightly. So let's do this. If yeah, so I need 1 or 2 to be valid. Let's see for this mock data. Just for the sake of, yeah, we're if I'd go any further, then I'm just basically making up a bunch of fake code to make this work, and that's kind of ridiculous, because at some point I need to actually start filling in real code to do this, because at its most basic level, this can be something that simply says there are a bunch of score sheets, and it creates and removes them and stuff like that. There's no need to do too much fake code here before I actually start filling something in. So if I do this, 1 gets no change, 2 comes to the same page. But if I say nothing, oops, cannot read property. Did I still mess it up even though I knew not to? No, this.router. Wonder if it doesn't know what this is. Not sure why I put functions there. So if you're not a guru at ES6 yet, there is a distinct difference between this and this. And the big difference between the two is, in this one, this might be something other than where we are right now. But in this one, this should be exactly the same thing as where we are right here. It should make sure that when I get to this code, this is this context of where this code was created. Let's see if this makes a difference. I'm hoping it does. There we go. That fixed it. So now it automatically redirects us over to number 2, because that is what gets returned by the server if we come in with no score sheet. It's not the most elegant way of doing things. A better way would be to update this URL but not actually do a redirect. It's okay. For the moment, it's good. We could always improve on it later. All right. So maybe it's time, now that I've actually solved some of the weirder problems. Okay, first of all, why not just go ahead and put this on port 80? And then I don't have a server running on this machine, so it's not really an issue. Yeah, okay, so that's better. I don't have a fave icon. That's okay. I should get one, but I won't worry about it right now. So that's actually something. Getting a fave icon is something I feel comfortable doing even without y'all watching over my shoulder. Although that might actually be something worth watching at some point. Maybe I'll do a really short video sometime that just shows how you might get a fave icon real easily. But it's not really relevant to live coding, so let's not mess around with that. Alrighty. What next? Alright, let's actually make the server do some actual stuff. So to do that, I'm going to be dropping some videos in the next 2 weeks. It's either going to be next week or the week after that. I've already got some videos recorded about using pour over for searching and for filtering, which is a nifty library for that stuff. But in addition to that, I'm going to be doing a video on storage, or actually maybe a couple of videos on storage. And I'm going to use a database. I'm going to use two databases. One is going to be an embedded database called NEDB. And it's a simple... It's an embedded database. So it's as simple as this. I can actually say something like this. I can say in my code, here, const NEDB equals require, and actually I have to change that for just NEDB. Actually, they called it data store, yeah. Because I'm actually having to create an instance of the data store. So let's actually use the same code they did. All right, that is sufficient to get their embedded database system into my app. When I'm trying to code up something quickly and I don't want to waste a lot of time, it's nice to be able to have a database or something like it that I can just embed. And so this is what that other video is going to be about, or at least it may actually be two videos, and probably likely will be. This is a way to just, without going and setting up MongoDB or MySQL or Postgres or something else somewhere else, and going through all those steps and then pointing to it and security and all that stuff. This is a simple way to say, I'm going to embed a database. It's good enough for the moment. It'll work for a long time. And then only if this starts to take off, then I will replace it with another database. And in fact, that's what those videos are going to be about, is pointing out that although this is not a perfect database, it is one where there's a good migration path potentially to use NEDB, but then because NEDB is very much like MongoDB, then graduate to MongoDB. So, without having to change a lot of stuff. So let's do, we're going to do it like this one here. And then we're going to wrap up. Sorry, my trackpad is just turned into absolute garbage on this machine. I'll just copy all that and then cut it down. Okay. Actually, arguably, it belongs up here. We don't need this. We already did that. Okay. And then the file name, we will say this is Scoresheets. There we go. At that point, it will actually, when the server comes back up, actually the server is probably crashing at this moment. And let's go back over here, and you should see that right here. Yep, there's our problem, because it says, well, I don't have that package. We can fix that. npm install NEDB. And as soon as we installed the package, NodeMon reloaded, which then caused the database to be created, because that's the first thing we do up here. So let's, what the hell? Let's just fill in a couple of lines here, and then we will call it good. So let's do we will rip off this example, which is basically for creating one. Now, we're not going to put any real thought into the score sheet right now. This is going to be real crude. So, all right. First off, let's save it so it gets formatted a little bit. We are not interested in having anything on the score sheet just yet. So let's just get rid of everything that's on the score sheet. It's now an empty document. All right, so let's actually rename this. There we go. All right, so now that it's called that. And we are going to do this. All right. And this needs to come inside here. Oops, wrong line, John. Let's come back to the error. Let's not do that right now. Yeah, we can go with that. All right, so new. There we go. So in theory, whenever we try to create a new one, it's going to actually create a record in the scoresheet database and then return the ID of that record. Likewise, we're going to do a thing in here. That's going to be a find. Okay, so docs always comes back as an array for this. I think that's kind of a MongoDB thing. It's also an AnyDB thing. And so we're interested in that first document that comes back. And then, let's see. Oh, okay, but actually that's going to tell us whether it's valid or not. So if docs.length equals 0, that's not valid. So we're going to else. Okay, so let's think this through. All right, so we got an ID. We use it to find a score sheet. If we find that score sheet, then if we don't find the score sheet, if we don't find any score sheets with that ID, we do the same thing we would do if we were creating a new one. Otherwise, we are going to return the ID of the document we found, which should be the same as the one you sent us. Is this going to work? Let's see. So let's check and make sure we didn't blow anything up. That looks like the last compile worked. That's not throwing any errors. Oh, let's put it on the first one. This is the server, so that when errors happen on the server side, we will know. So let's do this with no number, because there isn't one. I'll be darned. I think that actually worked. It presumably created one, and then it returned that ID back to us. So now, if I reload this page, that is a valid ID, and I ought to get the same one back. So H9 is what it begins with, and X4 is what it ends as. I'll be darned. I think that actually worked. Now to really know for sure, and there were no errors on the server side, I'll be darned. It worked. It created one record in the database for that newly created score sheet. Hey, with that kind of success, I am going to call it good for today. And I'm going to return to this sooner than 6 weeks later. I will, in fact, actually try to return to this within the week to record another. And let's see if we can turn success into more success. Thank you so much for listening again to As We May Think. I appreciate your viewership every single time. And if you enjoyed it, please click like and subscribe, as well as the notify bell that you see on your screen. That'll let you know whenever a new episode drops, which is normally Tuesdays and Thursdays. Again, thank you so much. Bye-bye.